Wicked Shizuku's Reviews, bringing you a southern perspective on books, movies, music, and much, much more. Stick around for a while, you just might hear something wicked. Well, hello friends. Glad you could join me again on Wicked Shizuku's Reviews. I'm Shizuku. Not my real name, just a pseudonym. So, sorry about last week and leaving everyone in a lurch who was actually looking forward to some more reading. I had some unexpected health issues and was not doing well, so I didn't want to come to you and not bring you at least 80%. So I'm making up a Monday, but I will be having a transmission tonight on for Tuesday, December the 6th, 2022. So I hope you will join me this evening at 11 from going anywhere from midnight to 3 a.m. Yeah, so look forward to it. So we'll get right into it, and we will continue with classical biology from the 1001 Things Everyone Should Know About Science by James Trefil. Last time we dropped off at fact 13, so we will be continuing with the animals. Animals. Number 14. The kingdom of animals ranges from primitive structures like sponges all the way up to human beings. It is the most diverse of the 5 kingdoms. Sponges may contain cells, but each cell can operate independently of others. If you pass a sponge through a sieve, for example, each cell is capable of producing a new organism. In higher animals, like humans, cells have specialized functions and depend on each other for survival. "15. Animals ingest their food. This, in fact, is the great evolutionary strategy of the animal kingdom. Unlike plants, which manufacture their own food through the process of photosynthesis, animals have to take their food from the environment. They can do this using one of 2 strategies. They can sit still and let the food come to them, like corals, or they can go out and look for it, like leopards. Herbivores, like rabbits, get their food by eating plants. Carnivores, like wolves, get it by eating other animals. And omnivores, like humans and raccoons, eat both plants and animals. Number 16. There are many phyla of animals. The animal kingdom is divided by some biologists into many as 31 different phyla. Most of these include lower forms such as worms and parasites. You can get some of the flavor of how these classifications work by looking into this representative but not exhaustive list. And there are photos. Sponges on the top and coral at the bottom are 2 different kinds of animal. Porifera sponges. Cnidaria, jellyfish, corals, and sea anemones. Plathyminthis, flatworms, including tapeworms. Rotifera, microscopic organisms. Nematoda, roundworms. Annelida, segmented worms. Mollusca, clams. Arthropoda, spiders, insects, crustaceans. Echinodermata, starfish. And chordata, everything with a spinal cord, including humans. 17. Animals evolved through a number of primitive forms. The ancestors of higher animal forms include things like roundworms, flatworms, segmented worms, jellyfish, and corals, and mollusks. Each of these represents a system phylum, or animal life, that biologists consider just as worthy of study as our own phylum of chordates. Looks can sometimes be deceiving. Animals like starfish and sea urchins, though they look simple, are pretty complex organisms. In fact, they represent the last branching of the evolutionary tree, which leads to chordates, vertebrates, and ultimately to us. 18. The successful phylum of animals consists of the arthropods. This phylum includes spiders, centipedes, and millipedes, crustaceans such as lobsters, and more important of all, insects. Arthropods are characterized by a hard exterior coating, exoskeleton, which is usually jointed to allow movement. The exoskeleton does not grow, so the arthropod must shed their old exoskeleton, molt, periodically as they grow. From 50 to 80% of all species on Earth today are arthropods. The horseshoe crabs, whose shells wash up in abundance on East Coast beaches, are arthropods who have survived virtually unchanging, but for almost 500 million years. 19. The strangest animal has its own phylum. Deep under the surface, clustered around hydrothermal vents, in the ocean floor lives one of the strangest animals known, a reddish worm that creates a long, tough tube to live in. It ranges up to 25 feet long, ingests its food, but has no organs that correspond to a mouth or intestines. Apparently, these worms are nourished by bacteria that live inside their cells. They have an entire phylum all to themselves, since no other animal is at all like it. The giant tube worms living in the Galapagos Rift at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And that's what they look like. Right now. So, number 20. Centipedes don't have 100 legs. Different species of this class of arthropods have been 15 and 173 pairs of legs. Species of millipedes, another class of arthropods, have between 20 and 400 pairs. And it says, how many legs do you count? 21. Insects are the most successful arthropods. Estimates of the total number of insects on the planet run up to 10 of the 18th power. So that's 10 with 18 zeros behind it. I'm not a math person. I'm a letters person. Roughly a billion for every human being. They all have 3 pairs of legs, which differentiates them from spiders, which have 4, an exoskeleton, and 3 parts to their bodies: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. 22. God has an inordinate love of beetles. With this comment, the eminent British biologist J.B.S. Haldane is said to have answered a questioner who wanted to know what studying nature had taught him about the mind of the Creator. Among the successful insects, the most successful order is Coleoptera, or beetles. There are more species of beetles than anything else on Earth. I was an avid insect collector as a boy, and I was astonished to learn that there were hundreds of different species of beetles in the Chicago area. I found the task of collecting them all rather daunting and switched to physics before I finished. I recall someone also asking me why so many beetles on Earth when there's like 37,000 known species of beetles. It is a good point, though. All right, so I'm going to take a short break, get a sip of coffee, and I will see you in just a few minutes. Okay, so I hope you were able to go and get your coffee real quick. As you can see, I've got mine. And I'm ready to go with our next read, which is going to be the inaugural addresses of the presidents of the United States. And we're picking up with Thomas Jefferson. So, let us go back to our reading screen here. And so you can see his portrait very carefully. I'm going to use my other screen in order to be able to read this more comfortably for everyone. Okay. Thomas Jefferson. First inaugural address at Washington, D.C., March 4th, 1801. And if a little backstory, if you don't know this little story, is that John Adams left in quite a hurry right before the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson. He was one of the first presidents that was not there for the handing of the baton to their predecessor. So this was actually quite a tumultuous time because the Whigs were expecting for John Adams to have a second inauguration. It was very similar to what's going on. I'd like people to go back and actually do a little reading on this actual transfer of power. But I'm going to go ahead and continue. Friends and fellow citizens, called upon to undertake the duties of the first executive office of our country, I avail myself of the presence of that portion of my fellow citizens which is here assembled to express my grateful thanks for the favor with which they have been pleased to look toward me, to declare a sincere consciousness that the task is above my talents, and that I approach it with those anxious and awful presentiments which the greatness of the charge and the weakness of my powers so justly inspire. A rising nation, spread over a wide and fruitful land, traversing all the seas with the rich productions of their industry, engaged in commerce with the nations who feel power and forget right, advancing rapidly to the destinies beyond the reach of the mortal eye. When I contemplate these transcendent objects and see the honor, the happiness, and the hopes of this beloved country committed to the issue, and the auspices of this day, I shrink from the contemplation and humble myself before the magnitude of the undertaking. Utterly, indeed, should I despair, did not the presence of many whom I here see remind me that in the other high authorities provided by our Constitution, I shall find resources of wisdom, of virtue, and of zeal on which to rely under all difficulties. To you, then, gentlemen, who are charged with the sovereign functions of legislation, and to those associated with you, I look with encouragement for that guidance and support which may enable us to steer with safety the vessel in which we are all embarked amidst the conflicting elements of a troubled world. During the contest of opinion, though, which we have passed, the animation of discussion and of exertions has sometimes worn an aspect which might impose on strangers unused to think to think freely, and to speak and to write what they think. But this being now decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of the law and unite in the common efforts for the common good. All, too, will bear in mind this sacred principle, that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possesses their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate would be oppression. Let us then, fellow citizens, unite with one heart and one mind. Let us restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things. And let us reflect that, having banished from our land that religious intolerance under which mankind so long bled and suffered, we have yet gained little if we countenance a political intolerance as despotic, as wicked, and capable of as bitter and bloody persecutions. During the throes and convulsions of the ancient world, during the agonizing spasms of infuriated man, seeking through blood and slaughter his long-lost liberty, it was not wonderful that the agitation of the billows should reach even this distant and peaceful shore, that this should be more felt and feared by some and less by others, and should divide options as to measures of safety. But every difference of opinion is not a difference of a principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there be any among us who would wish to dissolve this union or to change its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of the safety which error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it. I know, indeed, that some honest men fear that a Republican government cannot be strong, that this government is not strong enough. But would the honest patriot, in the full tide of successful experiment, abandon a government which has so far kept us free and firm on the theoretic and visionary fear that this government, the world's best hope, may by possibility want energy to preserve itself? Question mark. I trust not. I believe this, on the contrary. The strongest government on earth. I believe it the only one where every man, at the call of the law, would fly to the standard of the law and would meet invasions of the public order as his own personal concern. Sometimes it is said that man cannot be trusted with the government of himself. Can he then be trusted with the government of others? Or have we found angels in the forms of kings to govern him? Let history answer this question. Let us then, with courage and confidence, pursue our own federal and republican principles, our attachment to union and representative government, kindly separated by nature and a wide ocean from the exterminating havoc of one quarter of the globe. Too high-minded to endure the degradations of others, possessing a chosen country with room enough for our descendants to the thousandth generation, to the acquisitions of our own industry, to honor and confidence from our fellow citizens, resulting not from birth, but from our actions and their sense of them, enlightened by a benign religion, professed indeed and practiced in various forms, yet all of them inculcating honesty, truth, temperance, gratitude, and the love of man, acknowledging and adoring an overruling providence, for which by all its dispensations prove that it delights in the happiness of man here and his greater happiness hereafter. With all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and prosperous people? Still one thing more, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor and the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government, and this is necessary to close the circle of our felicities. About to enter, fellow citizens, on the exercise of duties which comprehend everything dear and valuable to you, it is proper you should understand that I deem the essential principles of our government, and consequently those ought to shape its administration. I will compress them within the narrowest compass they will bear, stating the general principle, but not all its limitations, equal and exact justice to all men of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, the support of the state governments in all of their rights as the most competent administrations for our domestic concerns, and the surest bulwarks against anti-republican tendencies, the preservation of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad, a jealous care of the right of election by the people, a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are locked by the sword of revolution, where peaceable remedies are unprovided, absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority, the vital principle of republics, from which is no appeal but to force, the vital principle and immediate parent of despotism, a well-disciplined militia, our best reliance in peace and for the first moments of war, till regulars may relieve them, the supremacy of the civil over the military authorities, economy in the public expense, that labor may be lightly burdened, the honest payment of our debts and sacred preservation of the public faith, encouragement of agriculture and of commerce as its handmaid, the diffusion of information and the arraignment of all abuses at the bar of the public reason, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of person under the protection of the habeas corpus, and trial by juries impartially selected. These principles from the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation, the wisdom of our sages and blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civic instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those we trust. And should we wander from them in the moments of error or of alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. I repair then, fellow citizens, to the post you have assigned me. With experience enough in subordinate offices to have seen the difficulties of all of this, the greatest of all, I have learnt to expect that it will rarely fall to the lot of imperfect man to retire from this station with the reputation and the favor which bring him into it, without pretensions to that high confidence you reposed in our first and greatest revolutionary character, whose preeminent services had entitled him to the first place in his country's love and destined for him the fairest page in the volume of faithful history. I ask so much confidence only as may give firmness and effect to the legal administration of your affairs. I shall often go wrong through defect of judgment. When right, I shall often be thought wrong by those whose positions will not command a view of the whole ground. I ask your indulgence for my own errors, which will never be intentional, and your support against the errors of others, who may condemn what they would not if seen in all its parts. The approbation implied by your suffrage is a great consolation to me for the past, and my future solicitude will be to retain the good opinion of those who have bestowed it in advance, to conciliate that of others by doing them all the good in my power, and to be instrumental to the happiness and freedom of all. Relying then on the patronage of your goodwill, I advance with obedience to the work, ready to retire from it whenever you become sensible how much better choice it is in your power to make, and may that infinite power which rules the destinies of the universe lead our counsels to what is best, and give them a favorable issue for your peace and prosperity. Now, does that sound anything like all of those nasty things that you've heard lately about Thomas Jefferson? Does he really sound like a person that really wanted to keep people separated because of the color of their skin? I don't. And anyone who does, take another look at the histories. Go read Thomas Jefferson's own journal, which that can be found at the National Archives for anybody who doesn't know where to find it. That's where you can find it. So, I'm going to take another short break. I will be right back, and I hope you join me on the other side. And I am back. So, I'm surprised you stuck around after that last comment, eh? Okay, so we're going to continue on with The Art of Love by Ovid. And we are going to read Eulegy 5 today. Alright. His delight at having obtained Corinna's favors. 'Twas summer, and already past the hour of noon. I flung myself on my couch to rest my limbs. My windows were but half open. The light of my chamber was like the light of the woods, or like the glow of which follows after. Sunset, or rather like the twilight that comes between departing night and dawning day. Such is the light that is befitting for young women of reserve. In its mystery, their timid modesty may find concealment. Behold, Corinna cometh, her shift ungirdled, her tresses hanging loose on either side of her snowy neck. In such guise did the fair Semiramis offer herself to the caresses of her spouse, and thus did the Laius give welcome to her many lovers. I raised her shift, which withal was of so fine a texture that it was but a flimsy obstacle. Howbeit Corinna was not willing to be deprived of her raiment. She strove, but not as one whose will it is to conquer. Soon she gave up the struggle and consented to be conquered. When her apparel laid aside, she stood naked before mine eyes. Not a blemish was to be seen on her whole body. What shoulders, what arms it was my privilege to behold and to touch. What bliss to press a bosom shaped so perfectly for such caresses. What bliss to press a bosom shaped so perfectly for caresses. How soft and smooth her skin beneath her lovely breasts. Now divine her figure. How firm and plump her thighs. But wherefore should I tell o'er the number of her charms? Naught did I see that was not perfect, nor was there aught, how think sore, between her lovely body and mine own eyes, and mine own. Need I tell the rest? Wearied and we rested from our toil. May many an afternoon be thus sped by. Well, that certainly was a husband that loved his wife, wasn't it? So, next is our Scottish fairy tale. And I'm going to go back to my regular screen here to read to you a little bit more comfortably again. So, where are we? This one is called Whippetty-Stourie. Stourie. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but you'll just have to deal with me on this one. I am going to tell you a story about a poor young widow woman who lived in a house called Kittler Rumpet. Through whereabouts in Scotland the house of Kittler Rumpet stood, nobody knows. Some folk think that it stood in the neighborhood of the debatable land, which, as all the world knows, was on the borders where the old border reivers were constantly coming and going, the Scotch stealing from the English, and the English from the Scotch. Be that as it may, the widowed mistress of Kittler-Rumpet was sorely to be pitied, for she had lost her husband, and no one quite knew what had become of him. He had gone to a fair one day, and had never came back again. And although everybody believed that he was dead, no one knew how he died. Some people said that he had been persuaded to enlist, and that he had been killed in the wars. Others, he had been taken away to serve as a sailor by the press gang, and had been drowned at sea. At any rate, his poor young wife was sorely to be pitied, for she was left with a little baby boy to bring up, and as times were bad, she had not much to live on. But she loved her baby dearly, and worked all day amongst her cows and pigs and hens in order to earn enough money to buy food and clothes for herself and him. Now, on the morning of which I am speaking, she rose very early and went out to feed her pigs, for rent day was coming on, and she intended to take one of them, a great big fat creature, to the market that very day, as she had thought the price that it would fetch would go a long way towards paying her rent. And because she thought so, her heart was light, and she hummed a little song to herself as she crossed the yard with her bucket on one arm and her baby boy on the other. But the song was quickly changed into a cry of despair when she reached the pigsty, for there lay the cherished pig on its back with its legs up in the air, and its eyes shut, just as if it were going to breathe its last breath. "What shall I do? What shall I do?" cried the poor woman, sitting down on the big stone and clasping her boy to her breast, heedless of the fact that she had dropped her bucket, and that the pig's meat was running out, and the hens were eating it. "First I lost my husband, and now I'm going to lose my finest pig, the pig that I hoped would fetch a great deal of money. Now I must explain to you that the house of the Kittler-Rumpet stood on a hillside with a great fir wood behind it, and the ground sloping down steeply in front. And as the poor young thing, after having a good cry to herself, was drying her eyes, she chanced to look down the hill, and who should she see coming up it but an old woman, who looked like a lady born. She was dressed all in green, with a white apron, and she wore a black velvet hood on her head, and a steeple-crowned beaver hat over that, something like those, as I have heard tell, that the women wear in Wales. She walked very slowly, leaning on a long staff, and she gave a bit hirple now and then, as if she were lame. As she drew near, the young widow felt it was becoming to rise and curtsy to the gentlewoman, for such she saw her to be. "Madam," she said, with a sob in her voice, "I bid you welcome to the house of Kittler-Rumpet, although you find its mistress one of the most unfortunate women in the world." "Tut, tut," answered the old lady in such a harsh voice that the young woman started and grasped her baby tighter in her arms. "Ye have little need to say that. Ye have lost your husband, I grant ye, but there were losses at Shirra-Muir, and now your pig is like to die. I could maybe remedy that, but I must hear how much ye would give me if I cured him." "Anything that your ladyship's madam likes to ask," replied the widow, too much delighted at having the animal's life saved to think that she was making a rather rash promise. "Very good," said the old dame, and without wasting any more words she walked straight to the pigsty. She stood and looked at the dying creature for some minutes, rocking to and fro and muttering to herself in words which the widow could not understand. At least, she could only understand 4 of them, and they sounded something like this: pitter-patter, Hallywater. Then she put her hand into her pocket and drew out a tin bottle with a liquid that looked like oil on it. She took the cork out and dropped one of her long, ladylike fingers into it. Then she touched the pig on the snout, and on his ears, and on the tip of his curly tail. No sooner had she done so than up the beast jumped, and with a grunt of contentment ran off to its trough to look for its breakfast. A joyful woman was the mistress of Kitler-Rumpet when she saw it do this, for she felt that her rent was safe, and in her relief and gratitude she would have kissed the hem of the strange lady's green gown if she would have allowed it, but she would not. "No, no," said she, and her voice sounded harsher than ever. "Let us have no fine meanderings, but let us stick to our bargain. I have done my part, and amended the pig. Now ye must do yours, and give me what I like to ask. Your son." Then the poor widow gave a piteous cry, for she knew not now that she had not guessed before, that the green-clad lady was a fairy, and a wicked fairy too. Else had she not asked such a terrible thing. It was too late now, however, to pray and to beseech and beg for mercy. The fairy stood her ground, hard and cruel. "Ye promised me what I liked to ask, and I have asked for your son, and your son I will have," she replied. "So it is useless making such a din about it. But one thing I may tell you, for I know well that the knowledge will not help you. By the laws of fairyland, I cannot take the bairn till the 3rd day after this, and if by that time you have found out my name, I cannot take him even then. But ye will not be able to find it out. Of that I am certain. So I will call back for the boy in 3 days." And with that she disappeared round the back of the pigsty, and the poor mother fell down in a dead faint beside the stone. And that day, and all the next, she did nothing but sit in her kitchen and cry, and hug her baby tighter in her arms. But on the day before that on which the fairy said that she would be coming back, she felt as if she must go and get a little breath of fresh air. So she went for a walk in the fir wood behind the house. Now, in this fir wood, there was an old quarry hole, in the bottom of which was a bonny spring well, the water of which was always sweet and pure. The young widow was walking near this quarry hole, when, to her astonishment, she heard the whir of a spinning wheel, and the sound of a voice lilting a song. At first she could not think where the sound came from. Then, remembering the quarry, she laid down her child at a tree root, and crept noiselessly through the bushes on her hands and knees to the edge of the hole, and peeped over. She could hardly believe her eyes, for there, far below her, at the bottom of the quarry, besides the spring well, sat the cruel fairy, dressed in her green frock and tall felt hat, spinning away as fast as she could at a tiny spinning wheel. And what should she be singing but "Little kins are goddame at hame, Whippetty-Stourie is my name"? The widow woman almost cried out loud for joy, for now she had learned the fairy's secret, and her child was safe. But she dared not, in case the wicked old dame heard her, and threw some other spell over her. So she crept softly back to the place where she had left her child. Then, catching him up in her arms, she ran through the wood to her house, laughing and singing and tossing him up in the air, in such a state of delight that if anyone had met her, they would have been in danger of thinking she was mad. Now this young woman had been a merry-hearted maiden, and would have been a merry-hearted still, if, since her marriage, she had not had so much trouble. But it had made her grow old and sober-minded before her time, and she began to think what fun it would be to tease the fairy for a few minutes before she had let her know of what she had found out her name. So next day, at the appointed time, she went out with her boy in her arms and seated herself on the big stone where she sat before. And when she saw the old dame coming up the hill, she crumpled up her nice clean cap and screwed up her face and pretended to be in great distress and to be crying bitterly. The fairy took no notice of this, however, but came close up to her and said in her harsh, merciless tone, "Good wife of Kittler Rumpet, ye ken the reason of my coming. Give me the bairn." Then the young mother pretended to be in a sorer distress than ever, and fell to her knees before the wicked old woman and begged for mercy. "Oh, sweet Madam Mistress," she cried, "spare me my bairn, and take and thou wilt the pig instead." "We have no need of bacon where I come from," answered the fairy coldly, "so give me the laddie, and let me be gone. I have no time to waste in this wise." "Oh, dear lady mine," pleaded the good wife, "if thou wilt not have the pig, wilt thou not spare my poor bairn, and take me myself?" The fairy stepped back a little, as if in astonishment. "Art thou mad, woman?" she cried contemptuously, "that thou proposest such a thing? Who in all the world would care to take a plain-looking, red-eyed, dowdy wife like thee with them?" Now the young mistress of Kittler Rumpet knew that she was no beauty, and the knowledge had never vexed her, but something in the fairy's tone made her feel so angry that she could not contain herself any longer. In troth, fair madam, I might have had the wit to know that the like of me is not fit to tie the shoestring of the high and mighty Princess Whippetty-Stourie. If there had been a charge of gunpowder buried in the ground, and if it had suddenly exploded beneath her feet, the wicked fairy could not have jumped higher into the air. And when she came down again, she simply turned round and ran down the brae, shrieking with rage and disappointment. For all the world, as an old book says, like an owl chased by the witches. So I hope you enjoyed that rendition of Rumpelstiltskin of Whippetty-Stourie. So, and if you need reference, this is the particular volume of Scottish fairy tales I'm reading from. So, I hope you enjoyed your Monday reads, and I shall see you again soon, Tuesday evening at 11 o'clock. You have a good day, and thanks for watching.